Hello and welcome. It's Frances here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to help support this channel by subscribing, and also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such, I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of the lands upon which I serve. So this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different, and it's something that I've sort of been mulling over for a wee while now, and it sort of is a reflection on our modern society and how, on some level, I think it's impacting the craft. And one aspect that maybe is not being talked about is the sacred art of really using imagination through the gift of storytelling. Now, this is a very ancient art, and we used to gather around the fires, and this is how they sort of recounted lineages and hierarchies and stories of old, and even what we now sort of see as folklore and mythology. But even just telling stories seems to be a dying or a fading art. And this is sort of taps into an important technique of using the imagination, sort of exploring fantasy realms of other beings and other worlds and all manner of possibilities that can be used when someone is telling a story, because you are the listener. You are not necessarily a passive listener, but when you're just having words, no pictures, sort of given to you, you are left open to the sort of creative ability to then construct something from the story, from the words that are being told. However, if we sort of look at this in a modern perspective, even from a young age, this gift of storytelling seems to be diminishing as there's YouTube videos, there's movies, there's television programs. How many children are still being read to so they can activate and create this imaginary world? And our modern world seems to be very sort of scientific, right brain focused, almost to the point where it demands everything to be proven, to be factual, even if there is a degree of poetic license, shall we say, when it comes to the facts. And in such situations, this actually leaves very little room, opportunity for this sort of interweaving to occur between fact, what has been scientifically proven, and that which not is unproven, but which possibly cannot be proven, which isn't necessarily an untruth, but a sort of beyond the sort of the square linear confines. And we find this in particular in areas where we're talking about witchcraft, like in psychic abilities, and yeah, even in witchcraft, it's how rituals are worked, how magic is undertaken. Because often we can only see physical practicalities or the end results. We can't prove the sensations. We can't prove the internal workings that occurs, no matter how often academia sticks their toes into the craft and magical arenas to try and explain away the mysteries. There's a certain level that they can, and then it comes to a point where they simply can't, because there is this blending of fact and or fiction, the sort of in-between spaces. And this is where witchcraft in particular lives. To me in particular, it is such straight, and we're not talking about pure delusional fantasy that's taking something to the other extreme, but there is the sort of in-between space between fact and fantasy, where the hard edges of the factual world are almost dissolving, where what seems impossible is almost possible. And when we're looking at witchcraft today, there's a myriad of styles and interpretations, a lot attempting to give the seeker what they're demanding, and often we're seeing an increase from the seekers almost demanding proof. But there are still styles of witchcraft that insist that the seeker do just that they seek, that they pause for a moment, and while they sort of catch their breath, and in between demands of proof or access to realms that aren't actually hidden. Like the mysteries are not hidden. They are there. But we're too caught up in the head stuff, demanding proof and actualities and our right to have access to this, that we don't see them. But all we need to really do is sort of loosen this need for proof, for control, and for having hard edges to contain things in. It's almost like as we breathe and following the exhalation, that moment before the next in-breath is drawn. This is the time in that pregnant pause that the edges of our reality can soften. This is the time where the lines can actually blur. And it's here that enables the seeker to sort of fly between what we have long referred to as reality. And sometimes I wonder if what we see around us is actually reality. The Buddhists don't think so. The Buddhists say we're in illusion, we're in Maya. But especially from the West, we are taught to believe that what is out there, what's around us, is reality, and anything else is fantasy, make-believe. What if they were wrong? And I guess in a way, this also applies to when we argue over words, in particular witch and witchcraft and even Wicca these days, as to their meanings, as there are an increasing number of different interpretations, that it is as if someone has sort of taken all the letters of these words and thrown them up into the air, and then letting them fall as they desire. And I know that when I come across an interpretation of craft that, shall we say, does not align with me, with what I hold, the vision that I hold, the lens throughout which I look, I am reminding myself to breathe, even if I am sort of scratching my head in puzzlement. I need to sort of remind myself that there are times when I don't need to know or understand or even, I guess, resonate with all the different styles and interpretations. And what might not resonate with me could very well resonate with someone else, and where they are on their own spiritual journey and even making sense to them. And excuse me, and I should just be doing what makes sense to me. And I think if we all do that, then maybe the witch wars over these 3 words in particular might subside a little bit. And while there are times where we may get caught up in words, there are also other times where they are, I guess, important, or at least having a sort of common ground so we know where each of us are coming from, benchmark or a line drawn in the sand. So for us really to put aside any sort of harsh judgments of others due to their use of these words, and in particular, if they do not reflect our own interpretation. Sometimes I guess we need to sort of step back from our own microcosmic viewpoint and remind ourselves of the effect that this sort of angriness, this sort of, angriness, or I wouldn't say abuse, but when we get angry or upset, remind ourselves what this is actually doing to the macrocosm, to our whole world. Because everything, and I've said this before on this channel, everything is energy. What are the energetics of our own creations, of our own sort of anger and rage or disbelief, the words that we use when someone's utilizing a word that may be precious to us, but not in the manner in which we prefer it to be used. What is that energetic that we are projecting out, having on the collectiveness? And when you think about it, is there not already too much negativity out there for us to add our own contribution? Now, I'm not talking about that we will need to sort of adapt this love and light attitude, but just be mindful of our words, our thoughts, and the energetics that are behind these, and also our actions, because all of these can actually affect the magic that we draw to ourselves. Like attracts like, after all, the law of attraction. One of the 7 Hermetic principles that's believed to have first appeared by the hand of Hermes Trismegistus, who was a legendary figure, if you've not heard from him, believed to have originated. So there's a combination between the Greek god Hermes, who is also known as the messenger of the gods, and also the Egyptian god Thoth, or Tahuti. And it is Hermes Trismegistus who is said to have authored the Hermetica, the Emerald Tablet, whose teachings have sort of, I guess in a way, appear to have fallen to the wayside for many seekers these days. But Hermetics are not being pushed or being encouraged. And at times I wonder, too, with this sort of increase of interest in witchcraft, why there's this calling. Is there something beyond the sort of blanket commercialization that we are seeing consuming everything in its path? But what is beneath it? Is it a deeper yearning that people are having, especially in our modern age, yet they're not able to put their finger on it? Is this yearning part of our very makeup of being human? It's possibly connected with our existence in so many ways, because it flows not only just through our blood, but also on a deeper soul level. It is also all around us, because I believe this yearning is our connection with nature, the very essence of our being that supplies the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, everything. Yet we cut ourselves off from it. We disassociate that we are actually part of nature. And then when it comes to the gods, our Western world appears or has this tendency to be very secular. Secular, I should say, not circular, secular. But are we, as humans, is that part of our nature? Or is it something that naturally comes to us? And I say that because all around the world there are these stories, these myths, these legends, these folklore that speak of the creation times, the times when first gods stepped upon this realm with humans, this existence, this sort of creating the world that we are familiar with today. They were called the ancient ones, the ones of the first times. And they all had this connection with nature, which is quite interesting because the ancient Egyptians referred to them not as gods or goddesses, but as Neteru, which has been interpreted or understood to be the source of where we get the word nature from. Because the Neteru were perceived as more than just what we will see as gods and goddesses, as divinity in the Western mindset anyway. They were almost like spirits or aspects, energies of nature. And this connection with nature tends to underpin our very existence. So why not our spiritual and or religious belief? And being aspects of nature, it is the ancient Neteru who taught the ancient Egyptians the way of life, the sacred laws or law of the universe, and also their own place within it. And today, even that sacred teaching is still available for us today if we would only stop and listen to it. The Neteru, nature, is all around us, maybe waiting patiently to teach us, to share the knowledge with us if we would only stop and listen deeply. Spend time to sit, to feel that knowledge, seeing where it lands within our own bodies, within our own being. Yet our modern world is so fast in its pace that in order for us to keep up with it, we really can't take things too deeply. Or can we? Have you ever wondered whether this increasing fast pace that we're getting so caught up in is merely a distraction? After all, if we don't stop and allow ourselves to become rooted in the knowledge, it's knowledge that has been passed down millennia upon millennia. If we don't stop and allow ourselves to sink in our roots, we become basically like a tumbleweed that is blowing around depending on which direction the wind is blowing the strongest. And again, also without these deep roots, we lack the sustenance, we lack the nourishment, not only for our spiritual selves, but in our magical practices. And also this deep soul yearning of being connected to something greater than us, our place in the cosmos. And when we are so disconnected, this can cause pain. Feeling that we do not belong, feeling alienated. We are all coming from places of various pain levels, various levels of discomfort and separatedness, of doubt, confusion, even dissolution. For some of us, this level may be very fresh, very recent, within our own conscious memory, and in particular, say, with the Indigenous peoples, it is very fresh for them. If it's not in the immediate generation, it's in the parent generation or the grandparents' generation. here in Australia, I think colonialization has only really been around 250 years. So that's a recent memory compared to when you look at, say, Caucasian or us from colonial backgrounds. And what happens is that for us with probably more European backgrounds, through our DNA, through our culture, we have been at this level of pain and suffering and separatedness and discomfort for almost thousands of years. If we look at history, we've been at this level that today we see this threshold as normal. This is our reality. And that could explain why, especially when colonialization happened, from the 17th century onwards, with the Indigenous peoples, even today, we don't quite understand why they are still suffering and struggling, because their pain level is, though maybe at the same level as us, that's not their normal, and that's still in their conscious reality that is not their normal. Yet, for those of us from a more European background, that is our normal. And again, the world, what we're living in, is seeming to be reflecting this back at us. It's almost like holding us up with a mirror for us to look at ourselves, look at our pain, and remind us that this is not normal. And this world, however, is our man-made world. It's not nature. And it's almost like a catalyst realization in this, that is to nature we need to return. And it is to nature that we need to bring our magic and to bring our witchcraft back into alignment. And it's really not all that difficult. We just really need to stop and reconnect. Well, we really don't need to reconnect because nature is and has always been there. We just need to shift our awareness to be more conscious of our connection with the earth beneath our feet, with the air that we breathe, with the water that we bathe in or drink, even the source of heat that keeps us warm, or which actually encourages our food to grow. And if we want to connect deeper, then all we need to do is pause for a moment and consider the blood that is pulsating through our veins, our DNA, our ancestry. And while you may not even be aware of your immediate lineage, maybe just pausing for a moment and allow yourself to step into that in-between space to see what culture draws you, what stories, what myths sing to your soul. How does your body react when you read or watch programs that are specifically connected with a particular time and space or race or culture? And allow your imagination to come out of the darkness and take you somewhere. Allowing yourself to be taken to that in-between space where the edges are blending in to another realm, another dimension even. And remember that the exhalation leads to that pregnant pause between the in-breath and the out-breath. And it's here that I believe witchcraft truly lives.